Hello YouTubers! Today we're going to look at solar power. And I have a little 50-watt panel here sitting on my roof. Let's take a look. So here we are up close. You can see the handle here, a little latch. So I've just sat it on these blocks of wood to keep it away from the roof. This is a west-facing roof. And down here I've 3D printed these little brackets that clamp onto the panel and bolt down here with the gutter. You can see a similar one, a little different design. It has its little bottom and top support, holds it off without needing the wood, still bolted on. I'll probably eventually change this one, but since this is just a short-term test, maybe this will do. And here's the panel. It's polycrystalline. It's 225-watt sections put together with hinges to make it convenient to bring camping. You can buy these on eBay. I got this one for about $100. Okay, so here's what the setup looks like inside. We have the wires from the solar array that was up on the garage roof coming in, draped around, connected to the solar input on the MPPT charge controller. Then there's an output down to the battery. There's an output for the load, but we're not using. There's a COM port. That's if you have the software connected to a computer, you can monitor things. A temperature sensor for the battery, which I'm not using. We'll talk more about this soon. I have a little watt meter here. So we'll go down a little bit, and we have the inverter. In this case, I'm using an Ames 180 watt pure sine wave inverter. I like to use pure sine wave inverters. They cost a little more, but the power coming out is much more similar to what you'd get from a wall. And so we go down and we get to the battery. This is a jump starter pack. You can get these in many places. This particular one I got at Harbor Freight. See, it's got a built-in voltmeter. It's saying it's full. This is how the inverter is connected. So from the charge controller, the wiring down to the battery is wire nutted onto this, a fuse block. In this case, I'm using a 15 amp fuse. And out of the fuse, we come to an alligator clip here, which I have just clipped onto the bigger alligator clip that you would use if you were jump starting a battery. Just like that. And it's a similar thing on the negative side. So we turn on the inverter here. Powers your load. It's got another USB port. Now back to the charge controller. We have a screen showing that there's sun on the panel. The voltage is flowing into the battery and the load is on, because you can program this load to be on and off at various times or for various reasons. So it's scrolling through, showing us the load 0 amps. Saying the current voltage of the solar panel is at 17 volts. And the current coming out, amps, is 1.5 amps. And the panel has produced a kilowatt hour since I put it up a few days ago. Pretty good for a 50-watt panel. The battery's at 13.1 volts, and 2 amps are going into the battery. So notice here that we had 1.5 amps coming from the solar panel, but 2 amps going to the battery. So the charge controller does a DC-DC conversion. So even though you're getting 18 volts from the panel, 17, 18 volts from the panel, you are only needing 13 for the battery. So it drops the voltage to the battery, and to keep the power somewhat constant minus some losses, the current goes up. So we're getting 2.1 amps, from the battery, only 1.5 amps from the solar. But if you multiply the amps times the volts, they'll be roughly the same with a little bit of loss because this takes some power. And the cool thing with an MPPT What it does is it checks the panel and it changes its input impedance to match the panel's power curve so that the panel is always running in its most efficient condition. This is very useful. I used to have a PWM controller, and with this same panel I would get between maybe 100 and 150 watt hours in a day. Now I get right around 200 watt hours in a day, same panel, same battery, just changing to an MPPT. Highly recommend MPPT. This seems to be a good unit. This is the 10 amp model, so it can do 10 amps 12 volts out or 10 amps 24 volts out, and that'll be the most power this model can do. Well, that's it. That's my little setup I'm using for testing the solar panel, and have a good day.